Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show. Oh my gosh, this weekend. Increasingly grim news over the weekend and today out of the Middle East as Israel now reports at least 199 people are still being held hostage in Gaza, and Hamas releases a horrifying video allegedly showing, they say this is what it shows and we have no reason to doubt them, they're Hamas terrorists with stolen Israeli children and babies. Hamas labeling it as a video that shows their compassion. You cannot make it up, that these ridiculous attempts at propaganda. Do they not, are they stupid? I guess they're, in addition to being evil, they're just stupid. In the video, you see a young child being bandaged, a terrorist rocking someone else's baby back and forth in a stroller, a man clutching a baby on top of a rifle. Oh yeah, these are sweet, sweet scenes of compassion. Another telling a little child to say in the name of Allah before the child is told to drink from a cup. And believe it or not, some are buying what Hamas is selling as compassion. Compassion. Honestly, we don't know what happened to these children's parents. There's at least one report out of Israel saying that they've been killed. Part of me felt that when I first saw this I hope they never live to see that. I hope they can't see this. I cannot imagine the torture to a mom or a dad seeing your baby in the hands of these evil madmen. I don't know how to fight as a soldier. I think it would make me grab a gun and run into Gaza. Moms, can you, you would do anything. You would do anything. You would rather your child were gone, I think, than to see him in the arms of a Hamas terrorist laughing at him, holding him next to a gun. Who knows what they're doing to those children? I'm horrified by the video. That's who Hamas is. That's who these assholes on these college campuses are defending. Got it? Are we clear? That's the bad guys. Those guys. Those are the guys you want us to negotiate with, right? Okay. Israel, America as its closest ally, we're supposed to sit down and have a little chat with the terrorists about how it's bad to take somebody else's baby. It's bad to hoist him on top of your rifle after you slit the throat of his brother and shot his parents and let them all burn to death in their safe shelter. That's bad. We should talk about you stopping that. Bullshit. This is all such a farce. This is all such a farce as we try to pretend these are like reasonable people who, we'll chat about a two-state solution and, about de-escalation. Sure. In the meantime, Israel's now evacuating citizens from its own northern border, Israelis trying to move them away from what's becoming an increasingly dangerous northern border with Lebanon as tensions are escalating there with Hezbollah. There are some specifics this morning. I'll give them to you. Hundreds of thousands of Gazans reported. Oh, hold on a second. Now I'm reading the wrong piece. Okay, here it is. Israel evacuating residents from 28 communities along that border. People will be taken, Israelis, to hotels and guest houses paid for by the Israeli government on Israel's northern front. Tensions escalating with Hezbollah after Hezbollah began firing anti-tank missiles at Israel military targets, as well as an Israeli community near the Lebanon border on Sunday, killing one man and wounding several others. The IDF, Israeli Defense Force, returned fire at Hezbollah targets and created a 4-kilometer buffer zone along the border. That's not good. It's not good. We don't want to see this go to two fronts. I've heard some say it's inevitable that it will. And then I heard Victor Davis Hanson, he's always so worth listening to, saying he doesn't know that will necessarily happen because Hezbollah knows it's completely outmatched by Israel, completely outmatched, and that Israel will level it. So he was, I don't mean to put words in his mouth. You can listen to his podcast and you should, but he was suggesting he doesn't think Hezbollah in Lebanon is that dumb. There are also reports coming out of Gaza that hundreds of thousands of people have abandoned their homes in the north after Israel warned them ahead of its expected ground invasion. That's what Israel does. It warns its targets. The bombs are coming. The troops are coming. Now, it is true, these people have not that many places to go because Israel's not going to let them into Israel. They can move from the north to the south. But really, what would be ideal for them is if they could get into Egypt. But guess what Egypt is saying? It's a big middle finger from Egypt. They don't want these people. They don't care. They got a big wall, goes up high, goes down low, 30 feet into the ground. Can't get over it, can't get under it, can't get around it. Egypt doesn't want them. But the only group that's supposed to give these people humanitarian support after they launched a war on Israel is Israel. Got it? You understand the logic? Back here at home, President Biden took to 60 Minutes to warn against an Israeli occupation of Gaza, which, by the way, Israel doesn't want.
Would you support Israeli occupation of Gaza at this point?
I think it'd be a big mistake. Look, what happened in Gaza, in my view, is Hamas and the extreme elements of Hamas don't represent all the Palestinian people. And I think that it would be a mistake for Israel to occupy Gaza again. But to going in and taking out the extremists, the Hezbollah is up north, but Hamas down south is a necessary requirement.
I'm not exactly sure whether he even knew what he was saying. It's a necessary requirement to go up there and take out Hezbollah? We haven't even done that yet. What are you saying? What? Okay. He also went, and more interestingly in that interview with 60 Minutes, he was asked, are American ground troops a possibility? And he said, I don't think that's necessary. Israel has one of the finest fighting forces in the country. Nobody wants to see American boots on the ground there. Nobody. You know, the people who are trying to, I don't know if it's defend Hamas, however you want to put it, here in America with like the forever war. No. No one wants that. Literally nobody other than Lindsey Graham wants to see boots on the ground and America starting a war with Iran. This is about supporting Israel and its right to exist and defend itself, which is a commitment we've made under Democrat and Republican presidents for decades. Then there's the anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian, which is at times really pro-Hamas, terrorist rhetoric engulfing the West. We have seen it everywhere in places that are America's most important allies, like the UK. Did you see this? Look at this. This scene Saturday near the Prime Minister's residence in London, thousands taking to the streets, chanting slogans. Just to be clear, like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That is an exterminate Israel slogan. From the Jordan River to the sea, crosses right over Israel. That's what they're saying when they're saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, carrying signs like no justice, no peace. Sound familiar? They get a little BLM inspo there. Look at this. This is what open borders gets you. Good luck. We're on the same path. In Canada, an unhinged protester speaking with our pals up at Rebel News, insisting, listen to this brainwashed idiot, Hamas is anything but a terrorist organization.
Hamas is not a terrorist group.
Oh, it isn't, ma'am.
First of all, Hamas is not a terrorist group. It is a resistance that has been fuming for 75 years. Everything that they do is justified.
Including what happened last week?
Every single thing they have done is justified.
Ma'am, there were children murdered, there were babies beheaded.
Babies beheaded, really? Please educate yourself. Please check the news, because as a news reporter, you gotta check the fucking news, because they said that shit was fake, okay? Hamas is a Muslim group. They would never do that because it's against Islam.
They would never rape women or murder babies, she said, because it's against Islam. Okay. Speaking of needing to do our research, sweetheart, maybe the cold up there in Canada has gotten to your sweet little brain, because it doesn't seem to be working the way it's supposed to. And then there are our college campuses and those who turn a blind eye or even once supported far-left ideology who are now coming to grips with what has been done to young minds. This woke college mind virus has affected far too many students in far too disturbing ways. We're going to get to all of this today as Emily Jashinsky, who is culture editor at the Federalist and host of the Federalist Radio Hour, joins us, along with Eliana Johnson, who is editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon and co-host of the podcast Ink-Stained Wretches. Hey, subscribe to the show on YouTube and follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Millions of Americans earn and use credit card rewards. A few big box retailers want to take those rewards away. That's according to the Electronics Payments Coalition, a sponsor of today's episode. Rewards you may use on groceries and school supplies, cash back, to save on gas and to grow small businesses, and travel miles to make memories. The so-called Credit Card Competition Act would eliminate credit card rewards. No more travel miles and no more cash back. Visit handsoffmyrewards.com if you'd like to learn more. And if you want to help them, tell your legislator to stand up to the retail giants and to support consumers and small businesses. They are, as we affectionately call them, the EJs. Emily, Eliana, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Megyn.
I'm so over, what's these apologists for Hamas that you see over there, up north, here in our country. You know what? They're just confused. This was a battle raging on Twitter over the weekend. They're just confused college students. They're sweet little babes in the woods on college campuses who, the 35 groups at Harvard that signed that letter, they didn't know what they were, they didn't really support. They didn't really? Are you sure they didn't support exactly what Hamas is doing? Because they made it pretty damn clear in their letters and elsewhere that they totally understood. They understood absolutely perfectly, saying this is all Israel's fault. Everything that happens to Israel is its fault. It's almost like you expect terrorists to terror. That's what they do. They terrorize. That's their bread and butter. I don't expect Americans to back it. No, I don't expect even the most outlandish. You want to go out there and say Americans are racist, Americans are sexist, Americans are transphobic. Great, we're used to that rhetoric. But to go out there and say Americans, as Americans, we're going to support terror, we're going to back Hamas in the wake of its murder of families and children and innocents and seniors, that piece of it, I almost don't get, Emily. I don't get when we see our own citizens out there saying this crap.
It's sort of mind-boggling, and I saw your back and forth on Twitter that I thought was excellent over the weekend, and was thinking, on the one hand, it is true that people have a really hard time sorting fact from fiction now. It is true that people have been lied to, especially by the foreign policy establishment, to disastrous consequences. That has happened. It is a pattern, and it is something that has absolutely seeped into the American sort of political imagination. All of those things are true. On the other hand, especially when we're talking about college students, especially when we're talking about students at the so-called elite universities, they are adults. They are seeing Hamas's live stream of these attacks, and they have adult brains that can be used to make up what is a black and white, right and wrong issue. That doesn't mean that there isn't historical context. It doesn't mean any of that. It means that this was clear. It was clear as day. It was black and white, and it's almost insulting to Hamas to say that they are not doing these things because they want the world to know that they're doing these things. It is their branding. Terrorism is their branding, and they're now telling people not to leave Gaza. They're on the record saying that over and over again. So it is black and white. And I think as adults, if you can't make up your mind up, even in the sort of glut and the muddied waters of social media, if you can't make your mind up right now, I don't know that you do have business joining the adult world in any of these leadership positions that we so often see Harvard kids graduate into.
Well, that's the thing, Eliana, is that yes, when you are, 17 years old, you don't have your fully formed views on the world. But, when you are, let's say, young 20s and you're out there at these college campuses, or 19, 20, murder's wrong. You've learned by then it's not okay to kill babies, little civilians who are asleep in their beds. That's bad. Most humans have learned that by the time they go off to college. Doesn't seem like it should be such a high bar to require them to consider that knowledge before they sign these letters, before they go out to college campuses. And this is the way it came up over the weekend. Vivek Ramaswamy tweeted out the following. The Harvard student groups who co-signed the anti-Israel letter, and it blamed this entire thing on Israel. No quarter for the Israelis. It was 100% pro-Hamas. The Harvard students who signed that are simple fools, but it's not productive for companies to blacklist kids for being members of student groups that make dumb political statements on campus. Colleges are spaces for students to experiment with ideas, and sometimes kids join clubs that endorse boneheadedly wrong ideas. And he says he's against cancel culture and it's bad no matter who practices it. Okay. I weighed in saying, this is your view as a presidential candidate when we're talking about, these are not kids who are like, I was a little liberal when I was pro-Greenpeace when I was in college. I was pro-choice and then I became pro-life later. These are young people who are out there demonstrating, writing letters as the murdering is going on of children, attacking the children, attacking Israel, siding with terrorists, Eliana. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't want anything to do with any of them. I am 100% pro-blacklist. It is not cancel culture. I don't associate with terrorists. I don't hire their sympathizers, and I don't recommend you do it either.
First, Megyn, I'm going to ask your audience to excuse my voice. I'm a little bit hoarse, but I think this is a really healthy debate for the country to have, and I'm glad we're having it, though I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. This is not, I think blacklist is the wrong term for it. Student groups sign these statements, and we saw the hedge fund CEO, Bill Ackman, say, I want to know the members of these groups because I want to make sure not to hire the members of these groups to my hedge fund, Pershing Square Capital. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy, on the other hand, if he thinks these are kids who entertain silly ideas, he's free to hire them. There is no blanket blacklist.
Exactly.
Each private company is free to do what it so chooses. And I think it is a lesson to the kids who are members of these groups that these are serious ideas. These are serious world events. They should think long and hard before they sign their names to statements. That shouldn't be too hard for the careerist kids at the Harvards and Yales and Princetons and Stanford to understand. They understand that quite well, but employers are watching. And by the way, there are plenty of law school student groups and med school student groups that sign these statements. It is not just 18-year-old undergraduate kids. There are plenty of 25 and 30-year-olds who sign these statements. But every employer is going to make up his own mind whether he wants a signatory of one of these statements at his company. Plenty of them will decide they do. But those who don't, they are perfectly free to say, we don't want somebody who blamed the victim of a terror attack for that attack to work at our company. And we saw Ken Griffin of Citadel, who gave $300 million to Harvard, tell the New York Times this morning, absolutely not. None of the kids who signed these statements will work at Citadel. And he said, 100 years ago, these people would have been considered adults. Today, they're considered babies, but 100 years ago, no. And this is beyond the pale. And you know what? He's got a lot of other options of people who want to work at Citadel besides the 30 kids, the members of these 30 groups who signed the statement at Harvard.
You know what? As you were making even better points, your voice got like even more raspy, and it was working for me. You're crossing over to like little Robert F. Kennedy situation. What a trooper you are for coming on, notwithstanding your challenge today. We're with you.
Happy to be here.
But yes, this is exactly how I feel. If you want to hire these terrorist sympathizers, go for it. Good luck. I won't be patronizing your business. But they're not going to come to work for the Megyn Kelly show. And I'm sure they don't want to, trust me. But there are large corporations where they wouldn't be outing themselves as one of these student groups. If you signed this letter or you were part of one of these groups and you didn't support this stuff, all right, I'm open-minded to hearing like how you didn't realize that the lunatic who ran your group was going to launch this letter in the middle of a terrorist. I'm open. Great. Tell me that you disavow. I'm listening. But for those students who are part of the groups that signed these letters, blaming Israel and only Israel and cheering on Hamas, they can pound sand. I never want them anywhere near a company that I'm associated with, that my children would ever go work for. And I applaud these business leaders for saying no. So here's what happened over the weekend. So I challenged Vivek, and whatever, Vivek can defend himself. It was my pushback on his tweet that got things started. Then Candace Owens felt the need to weigh in on Vivek's side, suggesting it's all well and good. These kids can be rehabilitated. I've taken on people who have changed their views, and it's disingenuous to suggest that they can't be changed. And, I think it's wonderful that she's willing to take them on. I really do. I look forward to the Candace Owens internship program over the Daily Wire. And I have found a bunch of students who she could take on because she really thinks that they're open-minded to a change of heart. And here's just a few samples for her to call from. Here, watch.
My name is Arzul Mohammed. This is a Nazi fucking IDF Israeli bitch. You guys are fucking Nazis.
You're the one killing Jews.
Genocide.
You support genocide. You're the one beheading babies.
Nobody is killing Jews. You support genocide. You're fucking disgusting.
You support genocide of my
Nazi
people.
Bitch. By the way, my name is Arzul Mohammed. Come find me. Fucking Nazis.
Hamas are Palestinians. Okay? All of us Hamas.
Ma'am, there were children murdered. There were babies beheaded.
Babies beheaded, really? Please educate yourself. Please check the news, because as a news reporter, you gotta check the fucking news, because they said that shit was fake, okay?
Glory to the martyrs! Glory to the martyrs! Do you know what you say when we say, we will liberate the land? There you go. We will liberate the land by any means necessary. We will liberate the land! By any means necessary! There is only one solution! Palestine will be free! Palestine will be free! They got tanks, we got hang gliders. They got tanks, we got hang gliders. Glory to the resistance fighters! Glory to the resistance fighters!
Glory to Hamas. So there's that first nice girl, Arzo. She looks like a potential summer hire. I mean, you could put her in the, or maybe if Vivek wins, she could go intern at the White House, since he too believes these people can, they ought to, okay. Well, good luck with that. I look forward to your re-education program, and I hope you succeed. What do you think of it, Emily?
Well, okay, so the broader problem here is that we have utter sophists in our university system, especially at some of these elite colleges. You have professors, Judith Butler, some 20 years ago, maybe even less than 20 years ago, was talking about how it's important to understand Hamas and Hezbollah in the context of, struggles against oppression and colonialism everywhere. And that is not an isolated argument. Students have been being sort of inundated with that kind of argumentation for decades on college campuses. But it's much worse now than it ever has been, because these sophists, these people who are horrible at actual academia, because the standards have been lowered in the names of the fake sort of cause of social justice for years and years, are the ones that are educating these kids. Now, that doesn't take the blame off of the kids. If you are a Harvard student, honest to God, if you're an adult in the United States in 2023, and you look at what happened last week, loud and clear, again, Hamas live streaming some of this stuff, Hamas eagerly owning, embracing some of this stuff, and you are chanting by any means necessary. They have hang gliders in a way, glory to the martyrs, which sometimes they say means civilians. But I think when you're also talking about the hang gliders and by any means necessary, we know exactly what they were talking about. I don't care what your professors are telling you. I don't care what the media is telling you. If in the hours after a targeted slaughter that's how you are talking, you have problems that will not be fixed just by maturing and getting even older when you're already an adult human being. I mean, it's just completely outrageous. And I think also some of those crowds are being whipped into a frenzy by students whose families probably came here to escape violence in the Middle East, or to make better lives, voluntarily came here to the United States, and are just utterly ungrateful for the freedoms that the United States has shed blood to ensure for people who live here on our soil. I mean, it's a completely in the West, it's just been a mind-boggling week.
Here's what's crazy. All these student groups that have been speaking out, they're not backing down. You know, a couple of the Harvard kids were like, oh, I didn't mean to be part of that letter, after Bill Ackman, the hedge fund guy, was like, I want the names because I'm not going to hire them. And then a bunch of other CEOs said, I feel the same. Then they were like, huh? What? Oh, me? I didn't mean it. Because, of course, they're just sad little wannabe rich kids who are pissed that their Goldman Sachs job may have just dried up. Ooh, whoopsie. So, okay, fine. At least they've disavowed. But many of these people didn't disavow. And so as they've seen day after day, and by the way, the horrors and the atrocities were apparent on day one. But even giving them the benefit of the doubt that maybe they just saw a headline on day one. Now here we are, day 10? Where's your withdrawal? Where's your, I'm very, very sorry for what I did. That was so dumb. My God, I stand with Israel. This is absolutely terrible. It's not happening. They stand by it because they really do believe that Israel is white, supremacist, colonial, whatever. You could go down the list of what they're saying, and that it needs to be wiped off the face of the map. They've been saying it over and over. These are Americans in our country saying this shit. Report after report.
Many of them claim their central frustration is that equal concern towards Palestinian civilians and children isn't being shown in the media. Well, these are murders at a music festival in a kibbutz. And so if you want to have the media, if you want Americans to show concern for Palestinian civilians, as we absolutely should, on the other hand, you can't be chanting, we have hang gliders, glory to the martyrs by any means necessary. That's absurd and incoherent, and it just proves that for some people, that argument is a total lie.
Well, 100% agree. And here's the thing. Day after day, we get more reports of the atrocities coming out of what happened in Israel. I mean, and it is dark. It's extremely dark. I mean, I love this woman up in Canada who we just showed is like, there's no rapes. Oh, there's no rapes, really? Why don't you spend a minute, just look at Tablet Magazine. Why don't you take 2 seconds to read the reports of how at that music festival, women got raped next to their friends' dead bodies. They would rape women, they would kill the women, then they would rape somebody right next to the dead body of their friend. I guess she doesn't read past, I don't know, her Hamas issue talking points. Here's another guy. I-24 News from Israel has been doing great reporting. This is emergency responder Yossi Landau describing what he saw at Kibbutz Be'eri and Kibbutz Kfar Aza. Those are two of the main areas targeted with families. These are all families, including children. What he saw, his manner is very flat. He's got sort of a flat affect in all of this. And I wonder, this poor guy, whether it's what he has to do. But take a listen to what he says he saw. Sot 9.
When we go to the next house and we see in the living room to see 2 parents, father and mother, hand tied in the back, and in the other side against them, the children, 2 small children, and each of them were torched. I saw 20 children together with the hand tied in the back, and they were burned, they're shot and burned in piles.
20 children shot and burned in a pile, Yossi?
And 2 piles. I saw bodies that I never saw in my life, 670 bodies.
God, and forgive me, I had him confused with another guy who we also watched, a military guy who offered similar reports. Eliana, you don't hear that and say, my God. Let me put out a new statement. I am devastated by what has happened to these poor innocent children. Then I have no use for you. None. I don't want to see, I don't. Somebody else can hire these people if they want, but I'm not rooting for it. I don't want to see them do well. I don't. I'm now rooting against them. The same way I'd be rooting against them if they cheered ISIS burning people in the cages. The same way I'd be trying to keep them away from me and anything good if they cheered the beheading of Daniel Pearl. It's that disgusting. I have no quarter for these people. Either they're uninformed, but I don't believe that. I think they are following the news. They just don't care. They genuinely see Israel as evil and as the original perpetrator of atrocities, which is ignorant and blind. And why are they so blind? I believe it's because they hate Jews. There is a common strain in most of this commentary from the people we showed, and it is Jew hatred. That's putting a fine point on it, but it's what I believe.
Megyn, I do think that this has served as a clarifying moment about the state of our university campuses in this country. We've focused on the students and the student groups thus far, but it is worth taking a moment to reflect on what university presidents, university administrators, and other adults on these campuses have said, because it is almost as shocking. The statements that have come out of the presidents of Harvard, president of Yale, administrators at Columbia have been mealy-mouthed, morally backward. They've done almost everything they could to avoid the reality of the barbaric terrorism carried out against Israel. And at Harvard stood by for as long as they could, silent when those student groups came out and did what they did. It took them 6 days, I think, after those groups spoke out for Harvard to say a thing and to be shamed by former Harvard president Larry Summers about their silence. And for the past 10 or 15 years, they've created an environment where anybody with a dissenting opinion on campus is harassed and heckled, and where there's very little intellectual freedom. So in a way, it's hard to blame these students. This is what you get when you hire professors and you elevate university administrators with a DEI bureaucracy, and you admit students without merit in mind, but as a result, filtering for all of these other things. This is what you get. And
that's definitely what they did.
You're starting to see donors and others push back, close their checkbooks, and shame these people. But I think it's going to take another 10, 15, 20 years to reverse this if the outrage lasts.
The president of Harvard has just beclowned herself. I mean, she's just made an utter fool out of herself. Her name is Claudine Gay, and she whiffed it on the first statement. Then there was all blowback, as you point out. Lauren Summer, former dean of Harvard, ripped her. Then finally, she put out a second statement, which was almost no better. Then more and more controversy. Then finally, she puts out a third statement. And let me just, after years of Harvard punishing people for wrong think and wrong speak on these revered leftist issues, from BLM to transgender, you go down the list. It has finally discovered the value of free speech.
For saying boys might be better at, men might be better at math. He was bounced out of his job from there. That was 20 years ago.
That's right. Actually, I forgot about that. Lauren Summers, the guy who criticized her, one of her predecessors, was bounced for saying men might be better at math. We covered on this show Roland Fryer, who's a black professor at Harvard, I believe in the econ department, who was doing these reports, these studies on, there was one on, quote, acting white, controversial theory that explains the underperformance of some young black Americans, according to the idea that they risk being stigmatized by their peers for high academic achievement. In 2019, he was suspended for 2 years. They blamed it on an allegation of sexual harassment, but the truth is he was doing controversial research that didn't line up with the BLM narrative, And this has been completely debunked. There's an amazing documentary about what they did to Roland Fryer because he's a black man saying the wrong things. He's saying all the wrong things. They booted him off campus. On Harvard, 94% of students surveyed said they had self-censored in conversations with their peers. 88% felt they could not express an opinion because of how others would respond. It's to the point where one of the professors there, Kit Parker, a bioengineering professor, said service members, meaning military service, feel hesitant to disclose their military status to their classmates because they're afraid that being military will be so condemned on this campus. The president of that university, Claudine Gay, chooses now to say, free speech. We love opinions of all kinds, especially the recent ones, I'm sure is what she was telegraphing. Listen to her.
And our university embraces a commitment to free expression. That commitment extends even to views that many of us find objectionable, even outrageous. We do not punish or sanction people for expressing such views. But that is a far cry for endorsing them. It's in the exercise of our freedom to speak that we reveal our characters, and we reveal the character of our institution.
So, sure, great. She's the new Thomas Jefferson, Emily. She's all about the first, let's go, free speech, America. Yeah, she is just like Floyd Abrams getting up there to argue about our free speech rights. Let it fly. Okay, here's what I want us to do. The three of us, let's go later this week or later this month when Eliana gets her voice back. And let's organize a protest on campus in favor of the reality that women are women and only women can be women. We are the only women. That's it. That's the tweet, as the kids say. Let's go get a protest going on Harvard about how Ibram X. Kendi was a complete fraud, and so is the BLM movement. Yeah, BLM is a fraud. Claudine, come on, support my free speech rights. Let's do this. Let's let professors in class say that shit and see if they can get away with it. She's a fraud.
And this is rooted in the definition of hate speech that lumps in arguments that were previously non-controversial because they're obviously true about men and women being defined as hate speech, right? So if you were to go to Harvard and have this, Eliana's got a bullhorn because her voice is back and she's chanting about men and women in college sports, that's going to be considered hate speech. It's going to be a much easier decision for Harvard to call that hate speech. And maybe this situation will change them for the future because maybe they'll have realized that they screwed up their standards and now to save face, they have to let people say these things on campus. But previously, you were actually, when I was a student, I didn't want to do mandatory pronoun training. And they called me, they said that I had committed an act of violence against the transgender community at my school, that this was all some sort of harassment campaign. They tried to get my student group suspended. It was insane. That was 2015, just for saying I didn't want to do mandatory pronoun training. So they have been doing this for years and years and years and years and years in the other direction. And suddenly when it's inconvenient for them to have a broad definition of hate speech, when people are talking about hang gliders that were used to massacre Jews, that's not hate speech when people are embracing, or suddenly we have to have this broad definition of what is and what isn't allowed. But for the past 20 something years, it's been very narrow that anything that isn't leftist is hate speech. They have been the ones that have been leading that movement, and it has been the movement that has torn the country apart, and they have been the vanguard in that fight. And that's, by the way, why you see these students saying things that are so profoundly stupid. It's because they haven't been taught how to think. Granted, when things are as black and white as they were last week, it's still their fault. But in general, they sound so stupid because they've never been challenged. These ideas have just been allowed to metastasize in the shadows of public attention with taxpayer money, taxpayer subsidies for years and years and years. And they're utterly ridiculous and they've never been challenged. And that's why they're so incoherent and stupid at the end of the day. And by the way, I've hear from a dozen conservative students a year who are afraid to write that men and women are different or about the Second Amendment or anything for their campus newspaper because their career will be ruined, they think, down the road. And now this happens one time and we're all supposed to, throw up our hands and have sympathy. It's just so stupid.
Well, I will say on this issue, you know, I hate to say it this way, but it really captures what it is. Jew hatred, anti-Semitism. I don't think you get that from your college professor. I don't. I think you go into college with it. I think you were more than likely raised with it. And it's a chicken egg scenario. Did you become this way because you met this professor, or did you go to that professor because you shared the same ideology and you wanted to hear him or her say all the terrible things about the Zionists, right? I mean, Barry Weiss's story is a good one. She went to Columbia. She sat there as this obviously rabid anti-Semite was saying stuff about Israelis. It was super focused on Israel and the Zionist regime. And she challenged him. She was like, this is bullshit. Obviously, she is Jewish and she's been very outspoken on these issues. And she was shamed by some for doing that. Now, this person, the same professor, is outing themselves, saying more controversial stuff. I'll get to it in a minute. But I'm just saying this, he couldn't turn Barry, right? That people who show up with an open, loving heart toward Jewish people cannot be turned by one of these radical professors, at least most cannot. I believe most of these people arrived there because Jew hatred is a thing. It's a thing, sadly, in this country. And in the same way that we were told wrongly by BLM for the past 3 years that racists are lurking everywhere, and they're not, the failure to point out that anti-Semitism appears to be near ubiquitous in this country was a failure because it is. It's on the left and the right.
Was right out in the open when it came to a lot of the BLM activists as well. We had Tamika Mallory, who was the leader of the Women's March, who had previously praised rabid anti-Semite Louis Farrakhan. I mean, this is like not brand new at all. And I think it also goes hand in hand with America hatred, which is absolutely something that our culture has been teaching people for a long time. And when you fuse those two ideologies, it's very, very dark.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We played, I think it was on Friday, Patrisse Cullors, one of the BLM founders, saying explicitly she wanted Israel wiped off the map. Like Israel had to go. So, I mean, never mind the, BLM Chicago chapter tweeting out the hang gliders and celebrating the victory of these Hamas terrorists, not disowned, not even disavowed by BLM National. So we're seeing a pattern. Stand by, quick break, more with the EJs in 2 minutes. Finding an honest doctor that isn't following in the footsteps of big pharma can feel impossible. That is why millions of men and women have turned to one Texas doctor and the 7 reasons he says anyone over the age of 50 should be drinking this one thing. It's not milk or another calcium-rich drink. Instead, it is a unique protein that naturally declines with age and can significantly increase bone strength and soothe joint pain. He says it can minimize wrinkles and cellulite, enhance hair follicle thickness, and can even reverse nail damage, with users reporting results in as little as 2 weeks. He's offering viewers up to 45% off his bone, joint, and ligament restoring formula at nativepath.online/MK. It has thousands of 5-star reviews and over 4 million jars sold. Every order comes with a 365-day money-back guarantee, so try it today and get your money back if you want. Megyn Kelly viewers can visit nativepath.online/MK to get up to 45% off while supplies last. So we'll spend some more time on the media in a bit, but I do want to give a hat tip to Anderson Cooper at CNN, who, I guess tip of the hat, I should say, who's over there and provided just an absolutely chilling account of what he found reporting from Israel. He posted it on Saturday. Here's a bit of it. It's about a minute long.
From some cars, the IDF has retrieved dashcam videos that show Hamas gunmen roaming the site for hours, shooting freely. This one shows a bloodied hostage being led away. Then under the car, you can see another man hiding. He moves slightly, then stops. A gunman runs right up to him and shoots him point blank in the head or upper body. This is dashcam video of a Hamas gunman tossing a grenade into a shelter. When a man runs out trying to escape, they fire on him repeatedly. In another shelter a few miles north of the festival site, about 30 people tried to hide. A man named Noam Cohen recorded inside. "We aren't going to show you what happened next." Cohen says Hamas gunmen repeatedly tossed grenades into the shelter. People inside were blown apart. It's one of the most gruesome videos we've ever seen. This is some of the aftermath. Noam Cohen survived hiding under body parts. We found the shelter in the town of Alamein yesterday evening. Someone had put a curtain up over the doorway, but nothing could hide the smell as you enter. My cameraman, Neil Halsworth, who's experienced a lot of war, began to retch and had to step outside. There's bloody handprints on the wall. There's blood smeared on the walls.
I mean, just gut-wrenching. And those reports of families going down to their bomb shelters, virtually all of these homes had them. What does that tell you? Only to be smoked out by fires. Hamas was setting then fire to their homes. And firsthand texting to family members saying they're smothering us. The family with three little kids was texting. This has all been documented. They're smothering us. We can't breathe. And so what do? Do you choose to die from the smoke inhalation and burn to death? Or do you choose to run out and be shot? This particular family chose to run out and they were all shot. They were shot to death. I'm so disturbed, Eliana. I'm so disturbed by the fact that we in this country aren't unified on these horrors. I get terrorists we've had enough exposure to them over the past 20 years. I don't get us. What's happening to us?
As I said before, Megyn, I think a lot of it does go back to the rot in our educational system, because we're putting out adults into the world who are educated by people who can't put out a statement that has any moral clarity about these events. And, you get what you educate. These are the adults that are premier educational institutions in this country. And also look at some of the lawmakers in Congress. And it is worth saying, I think, that going back to 9/11, there was a direct attack on this country. There were lawmakers who voted against going to war, a handful of them. We've always had those voices. We've always had those dissident voices in our country. But what really strikes me, and this goes back a bit to our previous segment on the universities, is we see university leaders and leaders elsewhere. Every time there's anti-Semitism expressed on university campuses, they call for free speech. Of course, there was no, during the Black Lives Matter movement, there was no free speech for racist views. We never heard calls for free speech then. But anytime there's virulent anti-Semitism expressed, then you hear them cry for free speech. What's striking to me, though, is they never tell you what they think. They, of course, are free to express their own views. The president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, what does she think about these acts? The president of the University of Pennsylvania, the president of Yale, what do they personally think? They're free to tell their students and show some goddamn leadership. What do they think personally? Nobody's calling for the silencing of these dissident voices on campuses. Those idiot students are free to put out their own views. Nobody's calling for them to shut up. What do the leaders at these schools think? Show some leadership.
That's exactly right. I'm thrilled they're going out and showing their beliefs. Thrilled. I would never shut that down. I didn't believe in shutting down. I also think like the kneeling at the games, I'm not for it, but great. Show us who you are. Let me see exactly which of you gets on the knee because you don't stand for America. Good to know. Good to know. That's one of the beauties of living in this country is that you're allowed to do that stuff. And then we're allowed to change our opinions of you. We are. I don't know because it's not just students. We're seeing sort of this coalition amongst like the squad and then another piece of the coalition on, I don't know what faction of the right it is. Is it some smaller faction of the populist right? Because it's not all populist, right? Trump is tweeting out pro-Israel statements, but kind of joining together on this messaging. And I'm going to leave that in the air, Emily Jashinsky, as I take a quick break and come back to you on it. Stand by. Like many people, I am trying to eat healthier these days, and that is one of the reasons I love good olive oil. And by good, I mean fresh. Olive oil packs the most flavor and healthiest nutrients when it's fresh from the farm. And that's the problem with supermarket olive oils. They're not fresh. They can sit on the shelf for many months growing stale. That's why I like my olive oil direct from small award-winning farms, thanks to a guy named TJ Robinson, also known as the olive oil hunter. When I first tasted TJ's farm fresh oils, I fell in love with their vibrant, grassy flavors. They're delicious on salad, veggies, pasta, meat, fish, you name it. As an intro to his fresh pressed olive oil club, TJ's willing to send you a full-size $39 bottle of one of the world's finest artisanal olive oils for just $1 little to help him cover shipping. Best of all, there's never a commitment to buy anything, and you can cancel your membership at any time. Get your free $39 bottle for just $1 shipping and taste the difference freshness makes. Go to harvestfreshnow.com. That's harvestfreshnow.com for a free bottle and pay just $1 in shipping. harvestfreshnow.com. All right, ladies. So just to continue the reaction here at home, and just, to me, it's been shocking as I see people who I really previously respected, or at least kind of respected, take incredibly insane positions. Now, this particular woman is on the left, but I always thought was a voice of relative reason on the left. Bernie Sanders supporter. That's fine. I don't care. Crystal Ball was a Bernie Sanders supporter too. I've always liked her. We have political differences, but I think she's got sane views. This woman is Briahna Joy Gray. She's been on this program before. And she tweeted out, and then I'll play you a clip. In response to Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, saying what separates Israel, the U.S., and other democracies when it comes to difficult situations like this is our respect for international law and the laws of war, and adding that Hamas uses people as human shields. That is all true, 100% true. And you don't have to believe me. I actually pulled it just for kicks. NATO, 2019 NATO report. The practice of using human shields is common to most violent extremists operating in the Gaza Strip. And they go on to provide the details, including they've noted that even in this conflict, Hamas has called for Gaza residents to remain in the crossfire. They like civilian casualties. They want it. They use them for propaganda. They use the civilians as human shields so that the Israelis won't bomb their military targets. That's why they have their headquarters underneath a hospital. So just Anthony Blinken's correct. That is what Hamas does, and we are different. We don't do that, and neither does Israel. Her response was the decapitated baby lie, the lies about rape. What lie is that, Briahna? Because I've seen for myself at least one picture of a baby lying in its crib surrounded by blood, including around the neck. So do we actually need to see the head separated from the body? What would satisfy you? What would make you see that babies, and do we really care? Do we care if it had its head chopped off or if it was burned or if it was shot? Walk me through what would persuade you, Briahna, that we've got a real problem on our hands with these Hamas terrorists. Is it, what do they need to do to the baby? What kind of motion picture would you like to see to make you actually believe that these are actual terrorists? But anyway, the decapitated baby lie, the lies about rape, I guess Tablet has been completely wrong. The women didn't get raped next to the dead bodies of their friends. Briahna knows better than the reporters who were there talking to those who survived the massacre. 260 were dead. But on-the-ground reporters went and actually asked the people what happened. But Briahna, sitting at her desk, she knows better, you see, because she went to Harvard Law School. She's educated. She's one of the elite. So she sees through the nonsense, gals. She sees the lie. It was all to establish some moral distinction between the piles of bodies killed by Israel and the pile of bodies killed by Hamas. Neither Hamas nor Israel respects international law. But this is the shell game played to justify continued U.S. support of ethnic cleansing. So the U.S. is supporting Israel's ethnic cleansing of Palestine, where the population has triple some huge number over the past 40 years. Never mind when Israel turned over the entire region to Gaza or to Hamas. Ultimately, in any event, the Palestinian numbers have gone up, not down. So they're terrible ethnic cleansers. The Israelis, they suck at it. The Israelis. This is her take. Okay, it's all, we want to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, and therefore we're making up lies about the dead babies and the rapes. Lies. That Anderson Cooper video, lies. He's in on it. It's like Alex Jones with his Anderson Cooper in front of the green screen. I saw. He made up Sandy Hook. He was part of it. Sure. Yes, Briahna, you are officially in Alex Jones territory. Welcome to the insane, bizarre parade. Here she is. She hosts what used to be Crystal and Sagar's show on Rising. Emily, you're on this. And she had this crazy exchange with Robby Soave, who's more, she's been sort of left but reasonable, and he's been like right, but like no one's extreme. Not this day, in a very, very heated exchange that kind of stemmed off of similar allegations by her. Watch.
There is still this embellishment, and I believe it is rooted in a desire to strip humanity from the people of Palestine and justify doing what Max Miller and a number of other officials in the Israeli government have said,
Max Miller is an obscure Republican official. It does not matter what he says.
So every leftist, wait a minute, Robby, every leftist in America was asked to apologize for some random protest.
They should apologize. They should apologize for their endorsement of terrorist attacks on innocent Israeli civilians, just as I am outraged by the retaliatory actions that are killing innocent Palestinian children everywhere. I care about both of these things and have said I care about both of these things over and over again. It is you and the idiotic, leftist, terrorist sympathizing people who do not care about the dead Israelis. They don't.
So I'm a terrorist.
And they've said it over and over again. Black Lives Matter has said it. The Harvard students have said it. The DSA in various locations have said it. The left endorses what Hamas did. They do. They endorse it.
The Harvard newspaper said exactly what the editorial page of Israel's major newspapers said.
I don't give a Briahna.
Okay, well, that's clear that that's your opinion, but the Israeli voices in Israel who are getting killed because their fascist right-wing government decides to keep 2.3 million
The Israelis are getting killed
people.
because a terrorist group targeted them.
Emily, you used to work there. Now you help Crystal and Sagar on their independent venture, but they're not normally quite that fiery. This issue has really divided people. And I have to say, what she's saying is absolutely outrageous to me. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous to me. What sane person questions, the decapitated baby lie, the rape lie? What the hell does she know? She's suggesting women didn't. How does she know anything? That's just that's Holocaust denialism. That's what that is.
I like Briahna, and if I were involved in that exchange, how I would have responded is actually that Haaretz is what she was referring to, the Israeli newspaper that allegedly said the same thing as the Harvard statement. I think that there was a huge distinction between those two statements. One, first of all, is coming from an Israeli paper that obviously has been covering at the time of that editorial all kinds of stuff, and it kind of goes without saying that they condemn the slaughter of Jews. On the other hand, also, the Harvard statement said that Israel was entirely to blame. We saw that in a lot of the statements, entirely to blame. And so I think, and I have actually been thinking about this a lot as I've listened to some of these arguments over the last week, there's this very visceral anger, frustration, rage among some people on the left about the way Western media oftentimes, and Western media has a whole lot of problems, and I think we all agree with that, will take like that I-24 report, which I believe said that there were 40 beheaded babies at Kfar Aza, and because that number might not be exactly accurate, we saw this sort of eruption of that visceral frustration a lot of people on the American left have with Western media, because they just think all of the Palestinians get ignored and they're the ones that are suffering under the oppression of colonialism, et cetera, et cetera. I completely disagree with the history there. I think that's where it comes from. And I think it was really, really, really unfortunate to see a lot of that on display last week in the aftermath of the slaughter of innocents. To do that within a few days, I mean, I get that there are serious concerns, but Hamas is bragging about using civilians as human shields. They are right now telling people not to evacuate, saying things like you have two options, or we have two options as the Palestinian people, to fight or to die in our homes. That is the kind of language that treats civilians as martyrs, not as people who should be trying to find safe passage to Egypt or other ways to evacuate, which the global community is actually working on. But to tell people to die in their homes, that is using civilians civilians as human shields, that is not evacuating civilians in a way that ensures they will be muddled together with the military population in Gaza, knowing that Israel is going to retaliate because hundreds, more than 1,000 of their people were slaughtered in cold blood, ambushed at their homes, at a music festival. These two things are not the same, and they're not justified, even if you believe that there were decades of colonial oppression. So I think to do anything but to blame Hamas for the situation that it's putting its own civilians in the context of this last week is really, really wrong.
I mean, the fact, it's so just dishonest, Eliana, to say these are lies told by the media. They're trying to suggest Hamas did evil things to draw a moral distinction between the evil Hamas and Israel. That's what she's saying in this tweet. She says these lies were to establish a moral distinction between the pile of bodies from Israel and those from Hamas. There is a moral distinction. There is a moral distinction between Hamas and Israel, whether she wants to see it or not. And she can delude herself all she wants based on how many babies were decapitated. Was it 40? Was it 4? Was it 1? Versus, and ignore all the evidence. Did you see the picture from Netanyahu of the burned babies? Are you one of the loonies, Briahna, who decided to do a little AI investigation on the picture like Tim Pool, only to later find out, oh, whoops, I embarrassed myself. It's real. How about the one of the dead, stabbed, shot? Couldn't tell because they blurred it. Baby in its crib. How about the bloody other crib that they tweeted out? How about the many bloody playrooms that they tweeted out? How about the Anderson Cooper? To run with it's a lie, right? And it's meant to manipulate you into thinking Hamas is evil unfairly, Eliana. It truly is Alex Jones territory. You really are, you've gone off the deep end. You need to be reeled in. And I don't know in her case what the motivation is, whether it's an anti-Semitism thing, what it is. But it's disgusting because the evidence is overwhelming that Hamas is murdering children and the elderly and the disabled. And if you don't believe that, why don't you believe Hamas's own videos where they have little babies hostage right now? What is that? Is that okay? Did the Israelis do that, Briahna? Is that cool with the international rules of war? It's a no. Show me the international rules of war that Israel has broken. They try not to kill civilians. They attack military targets. They drop a warning bomblet on the buildings that they're about to bomb to let the people know the real bomb is coming, get out. They send text messages to the Palestinians saying a bomb is coming, evacuate now. My God, she's right. She's wrong to say that there's no moral distinction between these two. There's a world of moral distinction between the two.
Well, I actually think this is a really sinister mode of argumentation that you're seeing, not just from her, but there was a Los Angeles Times reporter who also seized on this fact on Twitter. And it is to seize on a detail and saying this hasn't been proven. And the effect or the intended effect is to make others question the reality in front of them. Well, if babies weren't beheaded, how can we know if all of these other things are true? The intended effect is to say, did these events really happen? Question what you're being told from the press. Question the pictures that you're seeing. Question the videos that are being put out. Question the reality. Unfortunately, Hamas intentionally broadcast footage, and I'd be happy to get in an argument about were the babies beheaded or were they merely shot in their cribs? Were there 11 bloody handprints or were there 20? Because that's the path they're going to go down. And I don't think it's actually a winning argument for that. In terms of the moral high ground, of course, that's the battle they're engaged in. But it's lunacy. It's like saying that when the United States was attacked on Pearl Harbor, the United States did not have the moral high ground, and Germany also declared war on the U.S. The United States did not have the moral high ground. By the way, the U.S. made no distinction when it retaliated against Germany and Japan between members of the Nazi Party and civilians. War is a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. But in this case, there's only one party to blame for starting a war.
That's the
we
thing.
know that.
So it's not just Briahna Joy Gray, who, listen, I have no personal animus against her. I've known her to be a very pleasant person. I just think this position is absolute insanity. It's absolute insanity. And no surprise, we saw some of it over on The View, where Sunny Hostin pretended to be an expert on international war crimes and declared Israel guilty. And, you can imagine, I believe Joy Behar is Jewish. The reaction from some of her Jewish colleagues and non-Jewish colleagues. I'm Catholic. I can see it very clearly. By the way, just as an aside, these lunatics on Twitter over the weekend were tweeting out videos of Ben Shapiro years ago on Joe Rogan saying he doesn't believe Jesus was Christ. We know he's Jewish. This is like an attempt to get Christians riled up against Ben Shapiro. Guess what? He thinks that Jesus was just a man. We're aware, and we don't give a shit.
Whoa. I'm going to have to talk to Ben.
Unlike those who are radical Islamists, we in the Christian world and most of the sane world, no matter what your religion, don't give a damn if you don't practice our religion. We don't care. We don't care if you don't agree with all the things we agree with. In any event, here's Sunny Hostin over on The View accusing Israel of war crimes.
I think that we all know that Hamas has been designated a terror organization, like the Proud Boys here in the United States. That there is an international human rights body of law. And when you look at that law, part of it is retaliation against innocent civilians collectively is also terror and is also a war crime.
What Israel is saying consistently is, if you want your water, if you want your electricity, release our hostages. In my view, that's exactly not an irrational question.
And they should, but in the process, they should really refrain from committing war crimes or terror because they're going to lose the goodwill.
I do think it's very important, though.
Okay. They're not committing war crimes. The ones committing war crimes are Hamas. Again, the use of human shields is a war crime. The use of human shields is a war crime. That is Hamas's bread and butter. That's exactly what they do. That's why they have, in part, those Israeli babies around them. They don't want Israel to bomb them, and therefore they've surrounded themselves with Israel's citizens, some 199 of them, and some untold number of Americans too, we believe. Okay. This guy, Thomas Wheatley, very interesting piece in USA Today. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Law at West Point. He wrote a long piece today that was actually great, citing Article 27 of the Hague Convention, noting it places important limitations on siege warfare, demanding that those under attack that those doing the attack take all necessary steps to spare, as far as possible, edifices devoted to religion, art, science, charity, hospitals, and places where the sick and wounded are collected, provided they are not used at the same time for military purposes. Well, that's what Hamas puts its military headquarters under a hospital because it knows you're not supposed to bomb hospitals. But there's actually an exception there saying it places requirements on the entity being besieged, requiring it to identify all such places by some particular invisible signs, which should be previously notified to the assailants. And they say that this prohibition doesn't even apply if that location is being used at the same time for military purposes. So Israel's well within its rights to bomb the hospital if Hamas headquarters is underneath it. It's not nice, but it's not a war crime, okay? And I don't even know if we're talking about nice at this point. Its babies were murdered en masse. Then on the issue of starvation, this is what people like Sunny and others are arguing, that the Israelis are starving the Palestinians because they've shut off water and they've shut off the food supply going into Gaza. Has anybody else opened it up? Has Egypt been dropping supplies by helicopter? I await their intervention. Why does Israel have to save the people who are murdering its babies and its elderly? I'll wait. Okay. Even the United States recognizes it is permissible. It is permissible to seek to starve enemy forces into submission, even if it means incidentally starving civilians, as long as the incidental starvation is not excessive in retaliation to the military advantage anticipated to be gained. I don't like this. I don't like this any more than anybody else does. But Israel was placed in this position by the Hamas terrorists who run Gaza, not the other way around. It doesn't want to be doing this, but what obligation does it have to feed the military attacking it? Would we make sure that the Nazis were fed when we were fighting them? I mean, Israel has no obligation to continue water or food supplies going into Gaza, which is ground zero of the potential Israeli destruction, which was begun last Saturday. Who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll just say, and yet they will. They've come to an agreement with us, for example, already when it comes to things like water. It never in the course of human history is this kind of warfare something that we demand. It is just completely historically bizarre. And it's also kind of interesting because it cedes, in a way, the moral high ground here to Israel. If you're saying, we believe this Western, small L, liberal concept of war. For instance, there have been esoteric debates about whether settlements violate the Geneva Convention going back years and years and years. But if you're ceding the moral high ground to, for instance, the Geneva Convention, if you're ceding the moral high ground to Israel and the Western democracies that back it and saying they should hold themselves to these standards, et cetera, that they do try to hold themselves to. And I would never argue that Israel is absolutely perfect. But perfect is not the same thing as having the moral high ground, of course. And, when you're attacked like this and you're engaging in war, the concept of war in 2023 that we are demanding of Israel, especially when everything is on social media and you can see the civilian suffering up close and personal, it is awful. It is agonizing. It touches people around the world in ways that war never has. I mean, Vietnam was in the era of TV. The world wars were in the era of radio, and that was bringing this into people's living rooms in new ways. We're seeing something similar right now. We saw something similar with the Arab Spring, but this is war. And yes, if you are the people who are telling the others to evacuate, you have the moral high ground over the group that is telling people to stay and die as martyrs in their homes.
That's the thing. I mean, Eliana, it's both like, okay, you're very worried about war crimes. What about Hamas's war crimes? What about that? What about the fact that they are right now using Israeli citizens and their own citizens as human shields? All bets are off at this point. You could make the argument that Israel should go for it. I mean, that they're entitled to commit whatever they want, since that's the entirety of the Hamas war plan against Israel. Every little thing they've done, every serious thing they've done has been a war crime. The invasion into Israel, the targeting of all civilians. The entire invasion was about killing civilians, innocents who had nothing to do with this, babies in their cribs. Israel at this point could absolutely make the moral and legal argument that it's entitled to do what it wants. But even what it's doing now is measured and thought out and is not a war crime. But that's what you hear from the left. Okay. And then there's, we need proportionality. You need proportionality. You've got to count up the number of dead, 1,400 of Israelis, and you can't exceed that number on the Palestinian side. Or what? What does proportionality look like? Do the Israelis have to go in and start killing babies in their crib, but only a certain number in Palestine or in Gaza? Or might it be better to bomb buildings that they've given an advance notice that they're going to bomb because they think military headquarters are there, right? And Victor Davis Hanson also said, and I wrote it down because it's such a good quote, and he's a military expert, just in case people don't know this about Victor. He's brilliant on everything, but he's a true military expert. He studied every big battle, every big war. He knows exactly how they were won and lost. And he said, what is disproportionality? Can anyone show me the war that was ended by proportionate response? I can't think of a thing. It's exactly right. Who says, I'm going to do just enough, but not too much to defeat my enemy, Eliana? This is absurd. These are standards only for Israel.
The immediate thing that came to thought while you were talking, Megyn, was that I think the most prominent expression of anti-Semitism in our culture and in the world is the holding of Israel and Israelis and Jews to standards to which no other nation, no other people are held. And that is true with regards to so-called human rights, to the so-called war crimes. We don't see outcry about actions committed by any other nation across the world. It is only Israel that is held to such standards. There's only outcry by nations of the world when it is Israel that commits them. And there's only debate about whether the Jewish people, among all peoples, should have a nation. There's no debate about whether China should exist. There's no debate about whether Poland should exist. There's only debate about whether Israel to exist. And that in itself, I think, is the ultimate expression of anti-Semitism in our time.
The attempt
applied to the Jewish people.
That's right. And now, you get, again, Hamas is the one committing the war crimes, but the focus has got to be on Israel now. In the same way that now you have MSNBC running a death toll graphic that is joint. It's joint. They're not distinguishing between the Israelis and those killed in Gaza. They just want to sort of say, my God, see how many people have died? It needs to end. That's why they're doing it together. See, it needs to end. This is terrible. Look how many people have died. This is an atrocity over there. Just like the rest of MSNBC's coverage, which includes Ali Velshi, this Ayman Mohiuddin. I don't know how you pronounce his last name. I've seen him in the past. I don't know him. But I'll just give you a flavor for their reporting on this. Here's Ali Velshi.
We've had a lot of statements from Americans, mostly Republicans this morning, but some Democrats who it's a bit boilerplate. There's no nuance or recognition of anything that has been going on. Lots of Palestinians have said to me, boy, they wish that those same Israelis who were out there protesting the so-called judicial reforms would be protesting Israel's inhumane treatment of the Palestinians who live under Israeli occupation.
Oh, my God. Okay. Before I move on, just let me get Ayman's quote in, and then we can talk about both of them. SOT 25.
But Hamas is saying, well, if nobody is able to defend what is happening for Palestinians in the West Bank or in East Jerusalem with the home demolitions, the arrests, the children being killed, the desecration of holy sites, if they're unable to do that, then we only have the ability to do it with military might and crude weapons and military. What we're seeing today are very deadly consequences of failed policies, failure on the American administration's part to change course, to take a different course of action with how it deals with the Palestinians and the Israelis, failure on Israel's part, failure on the region's part, to not be able to say, this is an issue that matters.
Okay, got it, Emily? It's our fault, and it's the Israelis' fault. And when he gets to the part where he should say it's Hamas's fault, he says it's the region's fault. That's who's to blame. And Hamas really was just kind of forced to go military here because of all the strife that it has suffered. Poor Hamas in Gaza. That's just not factual. That is absolute Hamas propaganda.
I think a lot of people remember in the years after 9/11, but also, I mean, and this is where the point really comes in, the days after 9/11, people were not at that point saying, most people were not, certainly not on cable news, at least that I remember, although I was very young, having conversations about the United States and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden during the Cold War. That came later. And it's an entirely reasonable conversation to have about American Cold War policy radicalizing. People like Osama bin Laden are contributing to the radicalization in areas like that through the Mujahideen, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I think these conversations are entirely reasonable. I bitterly disagree with what both of them just said. And actually, Ali Velshi took the opportunity in the days after Israel, again, suffered mass targeted slaughter to smear Israel falsely as an apartheid state on the airwaves of MSNBC. And there's been some reporting that MSNBC has not wanted to have all of these people forward facing in the days after because of this. And if you watch CNN, Dana Bash has been fairly pro-Israel. Andrea Mitchell on MSNBC has been fairly pro-Israel. Like, some of the media is really polarized on this. I think MSNBC should put these guys out in the air as much as they possibly can so that the arguments can be exposed for for the weaknesses that they are based upon. Is the same thing with the college students. I mean, now there's a question of whether a private company, a media company like MSNBC wants to be associated with that for public relations reasons. But at the same time, I mean, I think by all means that they should have these conversations. I think that's why Rising is great, by the way, so that Robby and Brie can yell at each other. You can see Robby's sort of righteous indignation in that moment. You can hear the arguments be fleshed out, because that is a very, very weak argument in the days. You're bringing, pretty weak argumentation to the table within days. And it's the last thing I wanted to say was that death counter on MSNBC. That's actually really interesting, because I am completely 100% fine with doing that if, and only if, they are saying that it was the fault of Hamas, that all of these civilian casualties are the fault of Hamas, because they 1000% are the fault of Hamas. So if they're going to do that, fine. But they're not, as the clips just showed.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't want to silence the voices. I'm just not going to hire them. And it's not my cup of tea. I wouldn't be caught dead watching that show. Right. It was good when, like, Crystal, I watched a little. No, I wouldn't be caught dead watching that. It's not informative. And I don't think it's, well, whatever. I'll just leave it at that. I've been shocked at how many people who I previously respected have outed themselves as either know-nothings or anti-Semites since last Saturday. I really have. I don't feel the need to go down all the names, because some of them I'm just like kind of wounded by in my heart. And some of them I considered friends, and I'm really kind of wrestling with what they've done. Like, I guess it's like a seething anti-Semitism that I didn't know was there. I don't know how my Jewish friends are dealing with this. I really don't. I just feel like I've heard from so many of my Jewish friends and my Jewish audience members who are like reeling. They're reeling right now because they've had this horrible, horrible thing happen to Israel. And in the wake of it, they have so many in their own country just brushing it off as like, oh yeah, Hamas had to go military. They had to go military, because of the failures of Israeli policy in the Middle East, Eliana. Can you imagine? Imagine yourself an MSNBC watcher, a leftist who consumes news because you're woke and you're like, okay, I mean, some Jewish people might fall into that category. And then you see these reporters who you trusted saying that shit on the air, completely dismissing, the worst days of killing of Jews since the Holocaust. Like it's, they had to go military. What else were they supposed to do?
In many ways, we shouldn't be surprised, because we hear those sorts of excuses made for lots and lots of things and lots of people, whether it's a resort to crime and violence by others in our own country. But one of the things that I think is somewhat surprising and ignorant is that, Hamas has a charter. It was founded in 1987. Ideology plays a big role in the Hamas charter, and yet gets no mention by Ayman Mohyeldin or Ali Velshi on MSNBC. And it does, in many ways, I think, strip these Hamas fighters of agency in ways that they would not want to be. These guys are animated by strong beliefs and a strong ideology. The charter calls for the destruction of Israel and for Muslims to confront and murder all Jews. And I think it is a mistake not to talk about the animating ideology of this terrorist group. We've seen this movie before. We saw it come to our own country with Al-Qaeda on 9/11. And we should pay attention to what these guys are saying. It's absurd to talk about this merely as a reactive force and an outgrowth and a response to our own actions and Israel's actions. These guys have real beliefs and they're animated by it. We should pay attention.
The Hamas charter also says we don't believe in peace negotiations. No peace negotiations. Okay. So that explains the guys with the babies at the top of the show. Then it's not to negotiate a peace. And that's the other thing. All these people saying that Israel needs to, negotiate, maybe now's the time, two-state solution, which Hamas has no interest in. They don't want two states. They want one, from the river to the sea, only Palestine, no Israel. They're not interested, right? Like there's not going to be negotiations because that's not what Hamas wants. Israel didn't attack Hamas. Israel tried to let Hamas and the Palestinians live peacefully when they handed over Gaza to the Palestinians in 2005. You have it. You have the most beautiful land. You've got even more beautiful land. Look at you right on the water. You could do whatever you want with it. And they elected terrorists. And things went downhill ever since. They've been bombing Israel. They've been depriving their own citizens of any opportunity to live a full and robust life. And now the consequences of all of this have led to death, despair, dismay, and a never-ending Jew hatred, which, just ask any Palestinian child on the street. They're taught to hate Jews. And that is true for most Palestinians and not just Hamas members. I mean, that is something that's being taught over there. It's not to condemn all of them, but with a fair amount of this group.
Their children's textbooks, they are taught that Jews are cows and pigs and subhuman. And in that sense, the children in Gaza really are the victims because their minds are poisoned. They're taught hatred. They are taught anti-Semitism from the moment they're born. This is what they learn in school. There are summer camps that teach them to be terrorists, that put guns on them. This ideology colors the whole culture. These are the guys, this is the elected government since 2006. These are the folks who are in charge there, running it in the same way that the Taliban ran Afghanistan. These guys have had an autocratic, theocratic government in Gaza.
It's medieval. It's a medieval ideology. And you see that with their concept of martyrdom too.
It's back to there's one rule for Israel and there's a different rule for everyone else. In no other war are they saying it needs to be proportionate response, proportionate, right? Like make sure it's perfectly proportionate. In no other war are they saying you have to de-escalate the moment of the attack. Did they say that to Ukraine the day that Russia invaded? In the week after Russia has to make sure de-escalate, proportionate. No. And even now to look at Israel and say, you got to turn back on the water. You got to resupply the food to your enemies. You have to do that right now. Really? Without pressuring Egypt or any of the neighbors to try to help. No, just Israel has to help the one attacking it. We would never say that to anybody else. And by the way, those same demands are not coupled with any realization that Israel has said it will if Hamas releases its hostages. They said, give us back our babies. Give us back our women. Give us back our men. Give us back our civilians. You can have water tomorrow. You can have the food back tomorrow. No one mentions that Hamas, A, caused this, and B, has a hand in what happens next, short of full surrender. Release the hostages. And they won't. It conveniently gets omitted as yet another thing Hamas has done in holding its own fate in its own hands, and it's responsible for its own behaviors and the consequences of them. Stand by. We're going to do some politics next. This show is supported by Grand Canyon University. Founded in 1949, GCU is a private Christian university that's dedicated to delivering an affordable and transformative higher education. Their vibrant campus is located in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. And according to niche.com, it's ranked a top 25 best campus in the country. As of June 2023, GCU offers 330 academic programs with over 270 of them online, allowing you the freedom to earn your degree on your time from wherever you are. Their programs are also designed to challenge and inspire you. At GCU, your degree, whether it's a bachelor's, master's, or doctorate, integrates the free market system and a welcoming Christian worldview. And they believe that higher education should be accessible to all. Learn more about GCU's programs, competitive tuition rates, and scholarship offers from your university counselor. They're part of the supportive graduation team that's going to take a personalized approach to helping you achieve your academic goals, walking next to you every step of the way. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University, private, Christian, affordable. For more info or to enroll, visit gcu.edu. So let's talk about the politics of all this. Last week, Trump made headlines for calling Hezbollah smart, which I have to say I gave him a pass on, because if you look at the full context, he was like, they're smart. They're going to know how to, work this to their advantage. He wasn't like, Hezbollah is so smart. I wish we could be just like them. So I just feel like, okay, I get it. I take his point there. But then he did attack Bibi Netanyahu at a time when he should not have been attacked. He attacked him politically. It wasn't the most vicious version of Trump. He could have gone a lot harder, but he did. He did attack him. And and blamed him for not helping more in the assassination of Soleimani, which Israel did help us, apparently. They gave us intelligence about where the guy was. And just according to Trump, the night before the attack, Israel didn't want to actually join in the military exercise. That seemed to be what Trump was saying. In any event, the point is, just don't attack Bibi Netanyahu this week, okay? Any other time, but not this week. But since then, Trump has been tweeting out, truthing out, like hashtag I stand with Israel slogans, things like that. He's trying to make sure that he's on the side of the Israelis. I'm trying to find the exact Truth Social that he sent out so people can see his words. If my team knows where those are, tell me, because I don't know. I can't find them. Do we have his in Truth Social? He basically came out and said, I kept Israel safe, and he's trying to promote that. Look, the bottom line is Trump gave himself a little bit of fodder. He gave his opponents a little bit of fodder to attack him, and attack him they have. DeSantis has been all over Twitter and all over the place this past weekend saying it was inappropriate, it was the wrong time, he shouldn't have done it. But, you know, on the other hand, Trump's the one who moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Trump's the one who got the Abraham Accords started. I mean, it's really tough to sort of convince pro-Israel voters that Trump's not on their side. I don't know. What do you make of it, Emily?
Yeah, I thought that attack was absolutely silly over what Trump said about Hezbollah. I think the Netanyahu thing is interesting because I think this was Glenn Greenwald had an interesting quote last week about how diversity of opinion in Israel is there's much more diversity of opinion about Israel in Israel than there is in the conversation in the United States sometimes. And it's true, like a lot of people in Israel are actually pretty upset with Netanyahu and the government right now over how so many civilians were allowed to be attacked so viciously when, they have this vast intelligence apparatus that they pay for. So I think that is a legitimate conversation. I think dredging up old irrelevant beefs with him was weird, but at the end of the day, weird and wrong. But at the end of the day, really is not going to do much on the side of voters. And I think it's a whiff of desperation. You can sort of get that whiff of desperation from other candidates who were using that to try to wedge in an attack on Donald Trump because they're still 2 digits down easily in just about every state, I think, over Trump. I mean, I think maybe the closest is in New Hampshire, but everyone is trailing by huge numbers, the first caucus state, Iowa. So I think they're grasping at straws to try to do anything, but I don't actually think that's going to work with voters.
Trump truthed out the following, Eliana. What happened in Israel was barbaric. Now, American universities are allowing or enabling the open hatred against Israel and America. Instead of educating our young Americans, deans stand idly by while subversive groups are calling for a national day of resistance. Not only is this anti-Semitic, it is also anti-American. Good for him. I agree. I completely agree with this. And yet then he went out and he wanted to remind folks of who he actually is and who actually might be to blame in part when it comes to U.S. policy on this dicey issue. Here's SOT 14.
I kept Israel safe. Remember that. I kept Israel safe. Nobody else will. Nobody else can. And I know all of the players, they can't do it. But I kept Israel safe, and I will keep Israel safe. Thank you very much.
Okay, so this is where this is leading me. The Biden administration, which has given, I think it's released or made possible something like $50 billion to Iran over the past couple of years, not to mention the most recent payment of $6 billion, which was going to go into Iran's hands, which right now is on hold. Thank God, under pressure from the right saying, and a couple of Democrats saying, don't do that. Now, there is a very interesting lawsuit that Town Hall wrote up today, a woman named Sarah Arnold, recognizing that a Texas federal judge just allowed a lawsuit to advance, alleging that the Biden administration knowingly sent U.S. funds to Palestine, which they understood would run the risk of ending up in hands of terrorists. We knew some of this, but I thought it was very interesting, the details. The judge found that this is from a lawsuit by American First Legal. This is the Stephen Miller organization. They've been doing amazing stuff. The judge said AFL's recent production of records shows that the government, and she means the Biden administration, knew its economic support funding in the West Bank and Gaza was benefiting Palestinian terrorists, thereby increasing the risk of terrorist attacks against the plaintiffs and others similarly situated. So they're going to get more documentation on exactly what we funded over there and how much and how many red flags were posted before we did it. So I appreciate Joe Biden going on 60 Minutes and saying the right things this past week about Israel. Nothing about Iran, but about Israel. But let's be real. These policies of funding the Palestinians, of funding Hamas indirectly, of funding Iran, had a hand in what got us here.
Couple of things. I want to give a shout out to Free Beacon reporter Adam Credo, who wrote a story on this State Department memo that is the subject of that lawsuit, where State Department employees were flagging for each other the fact that they had to seek a Treasury Department exemption to send this money over to Gaza, and said they knew they were taking a risk that this money would end up in the hands of terrorists. So I wanted to flag that. And also,
we mentioned that last week.
To circle back on something that President Trump said, because I think it's important. And he said, no one's done more to keep Israel safe. I do think it's important for Americans to keep in mind that though the U.S. and Israel have a close alliance, Israel is keeping Israel safe. And it is important to Israel that it is responsible for keeping its own citizens safe. It does not take enormous handouts from the U.S. And I think it was a mistake for Trump to say that. It's also a mistake for him to be going after Bibi right now. It's stupid. He is picking a bone with Bibi because Bibi recognized Biden's election, and it's not going to hurt Trump with his voters. But I do think it's a bad sign about where his head is right now, which is still back with bones to pick about who was where on the 2020 election. And in terms of running and campaigning in 2024, it's not a good sign for Trump if his campaign is back in 2020. Moving on to Biden. Look, Megyn, the administration knows it has a problem with Iran. They know. The day that Hamas launched these attacks in Israel, every Biden administration spokesman was singing the same tune. They were all on television the same day saying not a single dollar of that $6 million has been spent. Not a single dollar has been spent. Now, it was strange, sort of, that they were all saying that at the same time, but they were trying to get in front of the attacks they knew would come. They know they're vulnerable on this. They know their policy towards Iran has been weak. They know this attack from Hamas on Israel, which is, of course, coordinated, whether directly or indirectly. They know Iran had a hand on. They know this is a vulnerable, weak point for them.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And that's also why I think, despite the Washington Post reporting and the Wall Street Journal reporting that Iran did have a hand in planning this, that they met in Beirut with Hamas leadership prior to the attack, the administration keeps saying no evidence, no evidence. Here was the president on that on 60 Minutes last night. Sat 4.
Is Iran behind the Gaza war?
I don't want to get into classified information, but to be very blunt with you, there is no clear evidence of that.
At this point, no evidence that Iran is behind any of this.
Correct. Now, Iran constantly supports Hamas and Hezbollah. I don't mean that. But in terms of did they have foreknowledge? Did they help plan the attack? There's no evidence of that at this point.
I don't know, Emily. I just feel like he's so tied up in them. He's just a continuation of the boneheaded Barack Obama policy to try to be friends with Iran. You know, it's like the mean girl at school who wants nothing to do with you, who'd really like to destroy your life. And you're desperate for her to like you. That's us toward Iran. And it's based in, Barack Obama started it. I'm actually going to go through this tomorrow. And he's continuing it. So I just feel like they have a political reason to say, no, it didn't, nothing that we saw, nothing. You know, maybe all this other sort of side funding that helps them indirectly, but not directly.
Yeah, President Biden has said things that are in contrast with his administration's record, or he's taken a tone that I think is in some contrast with his administration's record. When you look at people like Rob Malley, when you look at what happened under the Obama administration with people like Ben Rhodes, there was this kind of a campus ideology that had at that point migrated into Democratic politics and was installed in the Obama administration in the name of sort of turning a new leaf for Democrats. It's the post-Iraq foreign policy of the Democratic Party. And it's this kind of galaxy brain, anti-colonial ideology that then migrates into having some really devastating consequences from Israel. We know groups like the Brookings Institution were bought and paid for by Qatar over the last decade, which shelters Hamas leaders. We know that Rob Malley is under extremely serious investigation right now for potentially allowing like an Iranian spy ring to fester in the ranks of our own government with just abject sympathy for Iran. So this is a real ideological cause rooted in the Biden administration, and he may want to talk reserved like that now for any number of reasons, but it's hard to take that seriously that he has a real reason to do it, given where his administration has been on this.
Emily, Eliana, thank you so much, as always.
Thank you,
and we'll
Megyn.
see all the rest of you tomorrow.